Welcome to the Real Free News Podcast. Today's narrated reading is the essay, The Subversive Machinations of European Elites in the Post-Franco Era, the Betrayal of Europe with Open Borders and Greed. Francisco Franco's iron-fisted rule over Spain from 1939 to 1975 stood as a bulwark against the insidious schemes of European elites, whose thirst for power and wealth drove the continent toward economic integration and open borders. Franco, a resolute dictator, suppressed communists, socialists, and regional dissidents, maintaining Spain's sovereignty against external pressures. His death in 1975 unleashed a torrent of subversive forces, orchestrated by financial magnates, degenerate royals, and complicit political leaders, who sought to dismantle national boundaries for profit. The European Economic Community, established in 1957, and the Schengen Agreement, signed in 1985, emerged as tools of these elites, designed to enrich bankers and industrialists while flooding Europe with African and Middle Eastern migrants to destabilize its cultural fabric. These leaders, dismissed as white trash opportunists, betrayed their nations under the guise of democracy, prioritizing personal gain over the preservation of their people. The Spanish Civil War, Franco's rise, and Spain's integration into Europe reveal a calculated agenda by royals, bankers, and American elites to consolidate control through wealth and migration. Franco's regime, forged in the crucible of the 1936 to 1939 Spanish Civil War, crushed leftist ideologies, executing or imprisoning up to 150,000 opponents in a brutal campaign. His isolationist policies shielded Spain from foreign manipulation, but his death marked a turning point. Subversive elements, including exiled communists and democratic opportunists, awaited this moment to impose their vision. The transition to a constitutional monarchy under King Juan Carlos, a supposed savior, was a facade, enabling Spain's entry into the EEC in 1986 and Schengen in 1991. These agreements, crafted by leaders like Konrad Adenauer, Robert Schuman, François Mitterrand, Helmut Kohl, and Felipe González, opened borders for trade and movement, benefiting financial elites who profited from fractional reserve banking. This system, amplifying money creation, funneled wealth to bankers and royals, who retained vast landholdings and influence despite democratic pretenses. The European royals, particularly the British Windsors and Spain's Juan Carlos, maintained de facto control, masquerading as ceremonial figureheads. Their wealth, tied to land and investments, grew through integration, while open borders allowed unchecked migration, sparking cultural conflict. This essay contends that these leaders and royals, driven by greed and a delusional sense of superiority, orchestrated a scheme to enrich themselves and destabilize Europe. The Spanish Civil War's legacy, Franco's resistance, and the post-1975 integration reveal a continent betrayed by its own elites, who prioritized profit over people. The following sections dissect the war's origins, Franco's defiance, the role of financial and royal elites, and the migration crisis, exposing the treachery of these white trash manipulators who sought to control Europe's destiny. Part 1. The Spanish Civil War and the Seeds of Subversion. The Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 1939 was a brutal prelude to the elite machinations that would later engulf Europe. The conflict pitted the Second Spanish Republic, a coalition of socialists, communists, and anarchists, against Francisco Franco's nationalist forces, backed by monarchists, fascists, and Catholic traditionalists. Economic disparity, with rural poverty and urban unrest, fueled tensions, while political polarization between leftist reforms and conservative backlash ignited the war. The Republic's land redistribution and secularization alienated elites, prompting Franco's coup. His victory, secured by 1939 with up to 500,000 deaths, established a dictatorship that crushed dissent, executing thousands in a campaign against leftist ideologies. Franco's regime was a fortress against the subversive forces that later drove European integration. His policies, rooted in nationalism and autarky, resisted foreign influence, limiting Spain's exposure to the financial schemes of European and American elites. The war exposed the greed of those who sought to undermine Spain's sovereignty as foreign powers, Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy for Franco, the Soviet Union for the Republic, used the conflict as a proxy battleground. Yet Franco's strength ensured Spain's isolation, thwarting early attempts by bankers and royals to infiltrate its economy. His regime's suppression of communists, estimated at 50,000 executions, delayed the plans of those who awaited his demise to impose their agenda. The war's aftermath revealed the persistence of subversive elements. Exiled leftists, including the Spanish Communist Party, plotted from abroad, while domestic elites, including monarchists loyal to the Bourbon dynasty, anticipated Franco's death to restore their influence. These groups, aligned with European leaders, saw Spain's integration into the EEC as a gateway to wealth. The war's legacy was not merely ideological but a battleground for control, where financial elites and royals sought to exploit Spain's resources. Franco's resistance, though temporary, exposed the ambitions of those who would later use democracy as a mask for their schemes. The Spanish Civil War thus laid bare the fault lines exploited by Europe's white trash elites. Leaders like Felipe González, who emerged post-Franco, betrayed Spain by joining the EEC, opening borders to trade and migration. This act, framed as modernization, enriched bankers and landowners while allowing foreign influences to erode Spain's identity. The war's bloodshed was a warning of the chaos elites would later orchestrate, using migration to destabilize Europe for profit. Franco's defiance, though brutal, was a stand against these manipulators, whose schemes flourished only after his death. Part 2. Franco's Defiance and the Waiting Game. Francisco Franco's dictatorship from 1939 to 1975 was a deliberate bulwark against the subversive plans of European elites. His authoritarian rule, marked by censorship, imprisonment, and executions, suppressed communists and other dissidents, preserving Spain's sovereignty against external manipulation. Franco's policies of economic isolation, particularly before the 1959 Stabilization Plan, limited the influence of foreign bankers and royals, who sought to integrate Spain into their profit-driven schemes. His alignment with Western powers during the Cold War, including the 1953 U.S.-Spain Pact, was strategic, securing military aid without surrendering control to financial elites. The strength of Franco's regime frustrated those who awaited his death to enact their agenda. Exiled communists and socialists, operating from France and Mexico, formed opposition groups, anticipating a post-Franco era to impose democratic facades that would benefit their allies. Domestic elites, including monarchists loyal to the Bourbon dynasty, also bided their time, seeing Juan Carlos as a tool to restore their influence. These subversives, aligned with European leaders like Konrad Adenauer and François Mitterrand, viewed Spain's integration into the EEC as a means to access its markets and labor, enriching themselves through trade and banking. Franco's death in 1975 unleashed these forces. King Juan Carlos, installed as a supposed democratic savior, facilitated Spain's transition to a constitutional monarchy, a system designed to mask elite control. His appointment of Adolfo Suarez and support for the 1978 Constitution opened Spain to the EEC in 1986 and Schengen in 1991, aligning with the schemes of European leaders. These agreements, driven by profit motives, allowed bankers and industrialists to exploit Spain's economy, with foreign investment reaching $12 billion by 1990. Juan Carlos, enriched by royal wealth and alleged Saudi commissions, was complicit in this betrayal, prioritizing personal gain over Spain's cultural integrity. Franco's defiance, though brutal, delayed the elite agenda that flourished post-1975. His resistance exposed the ambitions of royals and bankers, who used democracy as a veneer to consolidate power. The transition, celebrated as liberation, was a calculated move by white trash leaders and monarchs to open Spain to foreign influence, enabling migration that destabilized its identity. Franco's stand, while authoritarian, was a rejection of the manipulative schemes that Europe's degenerate elites later imposed. Part 3. The Role of Financial Elites and Royals. The European Economic Community and Schengen Agreement were instruments of financial elites and degenerate royals, who sought to amass wealth and control through open borders and trade. Bankers and industrialists, leveraging fractional reserve banking, profited from the EEC's single market, which increased lending and investment. By the 1980s, European bank assets grew 20% annually, funneling wealth to institutions like Banco Santander, tied to Spanish elites. These financial magnates, collaborating with complicit leaders, orchestrated integration to maximize profits, exploiting Spain's post-Franco economy for their gain. European royals, particularly Spain's Juan Carlos and the British Windsors, maintained influence despite democratic transitions. Juan Carlos, with wealth estimated at €1.8 billion, used his role in Spain's transition to secure personal profits, including alleged commissions from Saudi deals. The Windsors, with the Crown estate valued at £14 billion, benefited from the UK's EEC entry in 1973, which boosted trade and tourism. These royals, seeing themselves as superior, retained vast landholdings and investments, aligning with bankers to perpetuate their power. Their ceremonial roles masked their economic influence, as they profited from the financial systems enabled by integration. The EEC and Schengen were designed to enrich these elites, not the people. Leaders like Felipe González, Helmut Kohl, and François Mitterrand, dismissed as white trash opportunists, pursued integration for economic and political clout. Spain's GDP grew 5% annually post-1986, but the benefits concentrated among elites, with foreign investment favoring banks and corporations. Royals and bankers, through networks like the European Round Table of Industrialists, ensured their wealth grew, using fractional reserve banking to create money that flowed upward. This system, amplifying lending, enriched those at the top while ordinary Europeans faced cultural erosion. The open borders of Schengen, implemented in Spain by 1995, allowed unchecked migration, a byproduct of elite greed. African and Middle Eastern migrants, entering through Spain's Canary Islands, moved freely within Europe, destabilizing its cultural fabric. Royals and bankers, indifferent to this chaos, profited from cheap labor and market expansion, betraying their nations for personal gain. The degenerate ambitions of these white trash elites, cloaked in democratic rhetoric, reveal a calculated scheme to control Europe's destiny through wealth and influence. Part 4. Migration and the Betrayal of Europe. The Schengen Agreement, by eliminating internal borders, facilitated a massive influx of African and Middle Eastern migrants, betraying Europe's native populations. Spain, a key entry point, saw 380,000 irregular crossings in 2023, driven by economic demand and global conflicts. Leaders like Felipe González, who joined Schengen in 1991, prioritized economic growth over cultural preservation, allowing migrants to move freely once inside Europe. This migration, enabled by the schemes of white trash leaders and royals, sparked tensions that threatened Europe's identity, fulfilling the elite agenda of destabilization for profit. The EEC's single market, implemented in Spain in 1986, created labor demands that attracted migrants, particularly in agriculture. Bankers and industrialists, benefiting from increased trade and lending, supported open borders, indifferent to the social consequences. Royals, like Juan Carlos, profited from investments tied to these economic gains, with Spain's foreign investment reaching $12 billion by 1990. The Windsors, though uninvolved in Schengen, benefited from the UK's trade boom, reinforcing their wealth. These elites, driven by greed, saw migration as a tool to exploit cheap labor, enriching themselves while eroding national cohesion. The cultural impact was profound. Migrants, moving from southern entry points like Spain to northern Europe, strained resources and fueled populist movements, such as Spain's Vox Party, which gained 12% of votes in 2023. Leaders, complicit in this betrayal, ignored the chaos, prioritizing economic metrics over their people. The degenerate royals, with their vast landholdings and financial ties, remained insulated, their wealth growing through systems like fractional reserve banking. This betrayal, cloaked in democratic ideals, was a deliberate act by white trash elites to undermine Europe for personal gain. The migration crisis, a direct result of elite schemes, was no accident. Leaders and royals, collaborating with bankers, opened Europe to foreign influences, creating a war of civilizations that served their interests. The legacy of Franco's resistance, crushed by these manipulators, underscores the treachery of those who traded Europe's heritage for profit, leaving a continent fractured by their greed. Conclusion: Franco's defiance. The European Economic Community and Schengen Agreement, far from noble endeavors, were instruments of betrayal orchestrated by degenerate royals, bankers, and complicit leaders. Francisco Franco's dictatorship, though brutal, stood as a defiant barrier against these schemes, preserving Spain's sovereignty until his death in 1975. His demise unleashed a wave of subversion, as white trash leaders like Felipe González, Konrad Adenauer, François Mitterrand, and Helmut Kohl, alongside royals like Juan Carlos and the Windsors, implemented integration to enrich themselves. These agreements, driven by greed, opened Europe's borders, enabling a flood of African and Middle Eastern migrants that destabilized its cultural fabric, fulfilling an elite agenda of control and profit. The Spanish Civil War revealed the fault lines exploited by these elites, with Franco's resistance delaying their plans. His death allowed subversives, including communists and monarchists, to impose a fake democracy, masking their influence. The EEC and Schengen, crafted by leaders seeking economic and political clout, funneled wealth to bankers and royals through fractional reserve banking, with European bank assets growing 20% annually in the 1980s. Spain's integration, marked by $12 billion in foreign investment by 1990, enriched elites while betraying ordinary citizens. Royals, particularly Juan Carlos and the Windsors, retained vast wealth and influence, using their landholdings and investments to profit from integration. Their superiority complex, rooted in wealth and lineage, drove them to support systems that concentrated power. The migration crisis, with 380,000 irregular crossings in 2023, was a deliberate outcome, as elites exploited cheap labor while ignoring cultural erosion. Leaders, dismissed as white trash opportunists, prioritized personal gain, with Spain's GDP growth of 5% post-1986 serving as their justification. The legacy of these schemes is a Europe fractured by elite greed. Franco's stand, though authoritarian, exposed the ambitions of those who sought to control the continent through wealth and open borders. The degenerate royals and leaders, cloaked in democratic rhetoric, betrayed their nations, leaving a continent vulnerable to cultural conflict. Their actions, driven by a delusional sense of superiority, reveal a calculated betrayal, where profit trumped heritage, and Europe's identity was sacrificed for the ambitions of white trash elites. Thank you for listening to the narrated reading on the Real Free News podcast. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment about your thoughts on Francisco Franco. Visit realfreenews.com for more content. And visit the Real Free News store for organic, non-GMO, all-natural food. See you next time on the Real Free News podcast.